Well, welcome to this narrated PowerPoint presentation. Today I want to talk about the early history of Rome. First, we'll talk about Rome's rise and look at a little bit of the political system that actually has an influence on the United States today. Then we'll look at how Rome expanded and why it did so. Finally, we'll look at different warlords like Gaius, Julius, Caesar and his actions, and we'll finish up with Octavian, the first Roman emperor, also known as Augustus. Roman mythology includes a story concerning the founding of the city of Rome. According to this story, two twin brothers were the fathers of the city of Rome, Romulus and Remus. Their father was the god Mars, and their mother was a priestess named Rhea Silvia. This statue was located near the famous Leaning Tower of Pisa. If you want a little bit more on this story, you can click on the hyperlink. The statue here shows the she-wolf who nursed the young boys after they were abandoned by their father. Just to give you a few more pictures from Pisa, on the left you see the Leaning Tower. I've got to say that when I went to Pisa, I thought it was going to be cheesy. It was awesome. Right next to the Leaning Tower, on the right, you can see that cathedral, and it was absolutely spectacular. On the bottom right, you see a baptistry, where if a person was going to get baptized, that's where they would be taken. People first began living in the area around today's city of Rome about 1400 BC. Why did they pick this spot? Well, it was about 15 miles off of the Mediterranean, but it was located right along the banks of the Tiber River. Not only did this provide them with a transportation source, but the area around the Tiber River was very fertile, and so people could grow all sorts of grains, olives, and other fruits. The arrow on this map shows the location of Rome. In many ways, the history of the Roman Republic was shaped by its constitution, so now I'd like to look at politics in the history of Rome. Probably the most important concept associated with the Roman constitution was a system of checks and balances. Why was this? The Romans absolutely hated kings. They wanted to make sure that one individual or a group of individuals didn't have too much power. Because of this, they separated the government's powers into different branches. The first of those branches would deal with the office of consul. The most important position in the government was the office of consul. There were two Roman consuls elected by all male citizens. The consuls ruled jointly and were elected to terms of 1 year each. The consuls held supreme military and political power. Primarily, the consuls proposed legislation and ideas. However, there were checks on the consul's power. Each consul could block or veto the actions of the other, in order to ensure that one person didn't have too much power. However, the Senate could name one of the consuls dictator, but only for a limited amount of time and only in a time of crisis. The other important political power was held in the Senate. This was made up of about 300 men who were from the leading families in Roman society. They had the power to control finances and foreign policy. Senators met in the forum as shown in this painting. Often what would happen is that one of the senators would bring their oldest son with them because they would end up inheriting the position once the oldest male in a family died. Senators were also allowed to wear purple robes. They were the only ones allowed to do so. The final area would be the assemblies. These included all adult male citizens. They had the final say and could vote up or down on the passage of laws. However, they generally followed the advice of the Senate and went along with the Senate's recommendations. We'll now switch gears a little bit and see how and why the Roman Republic was able to expand the territory that it controlled. Initially, the Roman Republic included only the city of Rome and the area around the Tiber River. However, by 265 BC, all of Italy, as shown in this map in the green, was united with Rome as its capital. There were many factors that influenced Roman conquest. First of all, the Romans had the best trained and equipped troops in Europe at that time. All adult males between the ages of 16 and 60 had to be ready to be called into action at any time. The Roman army was incredibly well organized. First of all, they were divided into legions. Legions usually had about 5,500 to maybe 6,000 troops. They were then further subdivided into centuries. These included 100 troops, and different centuries had specialties, whether they were cavalry, whether they were excellent in an advance or in a siege, whatever it may be, there were different specialties. Finally, those centuries were headed by centurions. You may or may not have heard that term before. Each soldier was given a helmet, shield, and a weapon. On the left, we see the most important weapon that they had, which was a gladius, or a sword. On the right, we see a helmet. The Romans were constantly trying to improve their technology. Initially, those helmets were made of leather, then of bronze. Roman soldiers were very highly trained and terribly disciplined. If someone showed cowardice on the field of battle, it was unforgivable and it could lead to their execution. One thing I find kind of interesting was that they largely ate a vegetarian diet. And they ate kind of a porridge, and that was really the basis of their diet. In one case, Caesar's men only had meat to eat, and they almost mutinied because they wanted their porridge. Finally, soldiers received little or no pay. The compensation that they received is if they were able to conquer a particular community, then they would be able to get the loot and then divide it among themselves. That's how they were compensated. Another unique tactic that the Romans used was that they didn't simply slaughter the people they conquered, which was the norm. Instead, they made them their allies. They also granted local rule to the people and even extended citizenship at times to the people that they conquered. Of course, the Romans were also famous for crushing any and all rebellion on the part of the people that they conquered. Roman citizenship was one of the most sought-after statuses in this ancient society. First of all, it included all individuals over the age of 15 whose parents were citizenship, so this was inherited. Secondly, it provided certain rights. A person would have immunity from torture. Also, you had the right to appeal to a court if you were accused of a crime, and if you were male, you had the right to vote. However, it also came with certain responsibilities. All males between 16 and 60 had some sort of a military service requirement, and you couldn't hold office unless you were a veteran of at least 10 years in the military. A third factor that influenced Roman conquest was that the Romans were excellent engineers, and they built a road network that quite literally bound the entire empire together. The light green as shown on this map identifies the Roman Empire up to about 1117 AD. As you can see, it's a huge stretch of territory. They didn't have telephones, they didn't have the internet, it was very difficult to communicate, so they built a vast road network as seen in the upper right hand corner with the roads of the Roman Empire. Here's an example of one of these Roman roads. This one is from Spain. Often they were between 16 to 24 feet wide, and they did this on purpose so that you could have a carriage go on these roads and 2 lanes of traffic. Here's another example, and this shows a road outside of Rome. Generally speaking, these were straight and flat and paved. Some of these roads are still used today. Roman engineers were able to successfully build bridges over rivers like this one. They often lasted for decades and centuries. This map identifies some of the major highways in Italy. As you can see, several go north-south and others go east-west. They even had road signs providing directions to where people might want to go. When the Romans conquered an area, they brought their civilization with them. The red, as shown on here, shows one of the first things that they often constructed, and that was a city wall. Next, they would build roads within the city itself. The yellow shows a main artery, one going north-south and the other going east-west. In the middle of different towns, right in the middle of the city walls, was often a forum. This was a place where people could buy and sell goods. Different areas in the walled city might be set up for residential apartments or others for businesses. Romans also were famous for constructing triumphal arches, which identified their military accomplishments. A person could see from a long ways away that as they were coming to a walled city, if there was a Roman arch there, this was a Roman city. This is a famous arch called the Arch of Titus, and it's in the city of Rome itself, and it identifies some of the major victories of Titus, an important Roman emperor. Here we see the Arch of Titus from another angle. On the right, we see the interior of the arch. You see where the arrow is pointing to that menorah? Well, Titus was a general who oversaw the sack, or the victory, over Jerusalem in 70 AD, and this arch commemorates his victories in that battle. Here we see another arch. This is the Arch of Constantine, who was another emperor later on. They didn't have TV commercials to show everybody all of their victories, but these politicians had to get their ideas out somehow, and through these arches, they were able to do so. Here's another picture from another angle of the Arch of Constantine. I thought that this one was just spectacular. It's located right next to the Colosseum, so if people came to a sporting event at the Colosseum, there's no way that you could miss this wonderful triumphal arch. Now I'd like to look at the influence of the military. As Rome's power grew, so did the power of different generals. As Rome expanded its territory and acquired a vast empire, the position of military leaders began to rise. Rome became wealthy as a result of its conquests, and if a military leader proved successful on the field of battle, they became more popular among the people. Once again, the colored areas of this map show the expansion of the Roman Empire. As Rome conquered different areas, spread westward and eastward, those conquered territories had to pay tribute. This provided a lot of money for people in Italy, and particularly in the city of Rome. A type of hero worship developed in regards to these military leaders. Instead of taking a loyalty oath to the nation as a whole, they began to become more loyal to specific generals. They flocked to successful generals because individuals could make more money if they conquered different areas and they could get the loot from that region. The republican system of government with checks and balances began to break down. One military leader who was able to take advantage of this was Julius Caesar. He came from a prominent family, and at one point he was the commissioner of public works. In 59 BC, he was elected consul. Later, he was a very successful commander in the field of battle as he successfully conquered Gaul. He took his popularity to a new level, however, and he wanted his men to show loyalty to him first. Eventually, a civil war broke out among different generals. Julius Caesar was the victor, and he had the Senate name him dictator. Caesar's actions were crucial, because once he was named dictator, the old system of separation of powers and checks and balances was destroyed, and he was dictator for life. For more information about Gaius Julius Caesar, you can click on the hyperlink below. Several members of the Senate were upset at Caesar's actions. Romans didn't like dictators. So on the Ides of March, several members of the Senate executed Caesar. Caesar did establish lasting reforms that still regulate our lives. First of all, he updated the old calendar and implemented a new calendar with 365 days. It's very similar to the one under which we operate today. The month in which he was born was named for him, and that was July. Now, according to some reports, he was born via cesarean section. It's probably not true. However, the procedure is often associated with him. Now I'd like to look at what happened after Caesar's death, and we see the rise of Octavian. The time period following Caesar's death saw additional civil war. The Senate couldn't control things, and different generals, those warlords, were engaged in violent civil wars. One of the individuals involved was Caesar's grandnephew. His name was Octavian. Eventually, Octavian emerged the victor in these civil wars, and he ushered in what was called the Pax Romana, Latin for Roman peace, a time period of tremendous prosperity. Once Octavian was victorious in the civil wars, he began referring to himself as Augustus, Augustus Caesar, the inheritor of Caesar's actions. He established a wide range of reforms that influenced the empire for several centuries to come. First of all, he decentralized the government and allowed more local governmental control of issues. So one of the things he did was he divided the empire into different regions and installed local governors and administrators to run day-to-day operations. It was impossible to try to run everything out of Rome, given the lack of communications, and so this was a very efficient bureaucracy that he established during his reign. Secondly, he improved city life by establishing the first police force and fire department in the city of Rome itself. He also ensured adequate access to water for everyone. Finally, Augustus was important for establishing the dole. The dole doesn't have anything to do with bananas, but it did have to deal with the amount of food in the city of Rome. See, people living in Rome didn't produce enough for them to consume. Government officials under Augustus provided free grains for people so that no one would starve. So the dole is the name of the free grain available to people living in the city of Rome. Augustus also implemented a system of religious and social reform, as he and many other Romans believed there was a decline in traditional Roman values. First of all, he introduced a series of laws curbing premarital sex and adultery. They also made it much more difficult for individuals to get a divorce. Tax incentives were put into place to encourage early marriage and rewarded large families, while penalizing those who remained single. Augustus himself was very pious and did not overindulge in just about anything. He was only married once, and when his own daughter flaunted the new laws concerning premarital sex, he had her banished from Rome. That concludes the bulk of the lecture today. Now I'd just like to offer a few thoughts in conclusion. Rome started off as a republic, where government actions were limited by a series of checks and balances. The republic was able to successfully spread, however, but different warlords who expanded the territory sought individual power. Caesar and Augustus ended that era of a republic and brought in a time period of empire. What you want to be able to do is you want to be able to answer the question as to how and why the Roman Republic and empire spread so quickly and easily. And secondly, what was the most important trait inherent in Rome which influenced the history of Western civilizations? Well, that's all I have for today. I hope you learned something new, and I hope to see you soon. Have a great day. Take care.